Trickling down, chandeliers, extravagance all around. Hypnosis as you move in your gown. I give everything to have you here unannounced. See how that sounds like love for now. Enjoy the way it looks for the night. Cause bright lights define the light of my life. My footsteps move to the drum all night. That's why I gotta live.
Hey, this is Ben Burnett, the host of the Ben Burnett Show, a podcast sponsored and hosted by App and Media. I want to thank Hans and the whole team for the opportunity to come in. My goal is to interview people from this community that aren't necessarily in politics and don't necessarily get the chance to come in here all that often, but are people that you should know about. And they've got stories that are worth hearing, and they've been fixtures in this community for a long time. Today's host is a fellow named Ed Bolian. Ed is in the process of actually buying real estate up here, and he'll be a resident real soon. He's the owner of an app called VinWiki. You may be more familiar with the YouTube channel VinWiki. Ed, how's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest with you, you're the only taker. So
that's a bad sign.
No, I'm kidding. We've got tons of people that have been begging to come on. But I wanted to see, when I saw there's been some interesting news in the last couple of days. I've seen that you're sort of an expert witness for the media.
Unintentionally, yes. It's been quite the shockwave through the local exotic car community the last few days.
And so nobody ever thinks to host podcasts from a news source or perspective around guys who work in the exotic car business. But real quick, talk about what VinWiki is and talk about anything else that's done there. And I want to dive right into the news of the day.
Sure. So VinWiki is an app that we call a crowdsourced vehicle history reporting platform. So you can think it kind of like a social version of Carfax or AutoCheck. So we allow anyone to contribute information to any car by its VIN or by its license plate. And we actually do most of our marketing through YouTube. We've got a pretty large YouTube channel that we've grown over the last 15 months or so to about 500,000 subscribers, and that's translated to about 100,000 new users in our app. So it's been very successful content marketing. I hope your podcast demonstrates itself to be similar, but it's been an interesting ride, and particularly lately because obviously most of our posts come from people entering license plates that we pull the VINs from government databases in, and over the last few months or years really, a lot of people have noticed there's a lot of cars around Georgia with Montana license plates on them.
Do most of those cars happen to cost a boatload of money?
Generally. So obviously the impetus for registering a car and establishing an LLC in Montana to own your car is that Montana doesn't have an upfront sales tax. Over the last few years, they've instituted some higher annual fees, but it's still insignificant. And once the car is 10 years old, it's a one-time fee of about $215, and that's the last fee you'll ever have to pay to register your car. Also, no emissions.
So let me run this back. If I buy my little Toyota minivan, and I can legally put it owned in a Montana-based LLC and drive it out of state and pay no sales tax in the state of Georgia.
So there are air quote law firms that are not necessarily run by lawyers that set up LLCs, and you use their law office address because you can't do it like Delaware with a PO box. And that is the address. You're the registered agent of your company. And yes, you're satisfying all the laws of Montana for sufficiency of residence. And that's how they do it. Happens every day, and it's obviously a lot more prevalent in RVs, which are mostly expensive, and with exotic cars.
So how many people would you say, how many cars are on the road in Georgia on any given day with a Montana tag that belongs to somebody who lives in the state of Georgia?
Sure. So I got contacted about a year ago by an officer for the Department of Revenue, and he said that they had figured out that there were about 560 cars that had Montana tags tied to Georgia peach passes.
Big brother.
And so they noticed, why are there so many Montana cars here? And I don't know what mutual friend we had, but he called and said, what's the deal with this? And I said, well, there's no sales tax in Montana, so they don't just register their cars there. And he started to get upset and started talking about different ways to enforce it. And I was like, look, man, that's your game. That's not mine. Whatever, just, let me know. And so then I got a call about a week and a half ago and they said, let me see it. No, they're gonna cut this part out.
Yeah.
I got a call about a week ago, and they said we just raided 2 owners' houses who we had found to have Montana tags, and we also executed a search warrant at Motor Cars of Atlanta, formerly Motor Cars of Georgia, where I was the director of sales for Lamborghini for 6 years, to get all their records of cars sold to Montana LLCs. And they already knew who to look for because in Georgia, now the temp tags are all printed.
Sure.
And they're assigned to the new owner. So they had Georgia temp tags tied to Montana LLCs. And so they had like 110 clients or something like that they were going to then investigate that had gone through that dealership. And so the last week or so has been kind of the, confusion really on the part of exotic car owners on was what we did legal? Is it justified tax avoidance? And different states have investigated this and generally found tax avoidance to not be criminal. It can be disallowed moving forward. Certainly they can, change enforcement strategies, but this look back into the cars that you've had in the past or, not having registered a car until now, that's really where a lot of the confusion.
My understanding was that they were trying, they executed a search warrant with the understanding that a crime had been committed.
So the accusation is not tax evasion, which some other states have sort of tried. It's actually felony conspiracy to defraud the state.
So there can be somebody out there that has literally never committed a crime of any sort, just got smart enough to find their way around the Department of Revenue and bought a $500,000 car in Sandy Springs in a Montana LLC, and they're treating them, there's search warrants on their house. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Just showing up, you kids at home.
What a great use of law enforcement in the state of Georgia. That's horrible. And it's not that, look, I've paid 7.75% sales tax on both of my vehicles. And to me, that's the only fundamental argument that there is to make, is that everybody sits here and pays that. But I also know, on the other hand, as a guy who's owned businesses, that the tax code in this country is entirely written for the guy who owns his own business. You can write things off. There are places you can go where your tax benefits are better than others. You look at half the companies here that are worth probably more than $10 million in annual revenue. They're all LLC'd in Delaware.
Right.
It's not any different.
Right. And the underlying issue here is that Georgia's vehicle taxation policies are insane. And most of us remember when private party transactions to the state of Georgia involved no sales taxes whatsoever.
That's right.
Which massively disenfranchised the dealerships because they were at a fundamental comparative disadvantage.
No question.
And so they tried to change that, not by simply adding a justified sales tax to all vehicle transactions, which would have been logical and easy, but they were also worried because a lot of states that do that have issues with people writing falsely low numbers on bills of sale. So what they decided to do was this TAVT system, title ad valorem tax.
Yeah, you see it in Canada.
Exactly, which did away with...
You see it in Europe. You see it everywhere, more or less, but here.
Exactly. And so we used to have ad valorem, which could be very expensive, up to about 1% of the value of your car every year. And it was a massive annoyance. And one of the reasons people started forming these Montana LLCs to register their cars, or people would go to South Carolina, which had a flat $300 used car sales tax. And what they would do is form these things. But then the problem was Georgia decided they wanted to know how much every car was worth. So as a dealer, when you sell a car, if I sell a car for $20,000, I have to look up the TAVT value. And if it's $18,000 or $22,000, you pay 7% of that.
Correct.
And strangely, you get full allowance for whatever the dealer shows you on trade. Mm-hmm. So it gives the dealer the latitude to kind of mess with the numbers and reduce the tax liability by doing that. And certainly that.
Yeah, I've traded
happens.
Cars and been like, you're still not there.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so these guys are trading cars generally pretty often. In many cases, they're owning cars that don't depreciate that significantly because they're either older exotic cars or new high demand cars that may transact over MSRP. And so the idea of just this light switch enforcement effort that suddenly we're not going to allow this, but we're not going to grandfather in anybody who currently has one. We're even going to start investigating penalties and fees for how long you've been doing this is really confusing, really shocking to owners, and very few of them really know how to react. I mean, obviously people are concerned. They don't want to be driving around and get arrested or,
Sure.
and have, and if I was for your normal, traffic cop that now is he supposed to pull over a car and just because he sees a Montana tag, is that now probable cause to investigate things? Like, nobody really understands this.
Hey everybody, this is Ben Burnett from the Ben Burnett Show. If you're a company that's in search of health insurance plans or evaluating a cost that keeps going up on you, you should call my friend Wendell Strickland at Strongside Solutions. You can reach him at 678-488-5702 or go to strongsidesolutions.com. Have a great day. So where do you think, how much money do you feel like is at stake in the next 6 months for the people that own these cars? And they're going to have to sell off assets? Or are they going to have to pay back taxes? Where does it end? Because it's not 7% or 7.75, depending on where you live. It's not frivolous money when you get to $500,000 or
exactly. Yeah. And some of these guys have 4, 5, 6 cars because, again, that just happens. There's been an explosion of production in extremely expensive cars over the last decade, and a lot of people have multiples of them because it just works. And I know it seems crazy to have a lot of cars, and I get told that all the time, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily that expensive. But between the two guys that they showed up at their house with search warrants, they titled 55 cars in Montana and avoided $1.6 million in sales tax. So if we'd estimate that there's probably about 2,000 cars registered in Georgia and Montana LLCs, and I think that's probably about accurate. And we said that they were all average about $100,000 per car. That would be $200 million. So we'd be looking at about 15 million.
Wow.
Is that correct?
Well, let's assume it is.
Yeah.
I feel like I can put forth a pretty logical argument to say that $15 million doesn't make or break the state of Georgia either way. And if you want to change the policy going forward, then knock yourself out. But there are tons of laws on the book. If you've ever been tailgating on a Saturday to any college football stadium, there are tons of laws that get broken. And there are tons of cops that watch it happen.
Absolutely.
And that's just one example of discretion. I think that, from a Department of Revenue perspective, to sit here and just, I don't even know if it's is it a win? And what's your goal? Why wouldn't you just change it moving forward and be like, guys, let's, hey, you own these, you do it again, and it's 7.75, and we're going to know because we cut you the tag.
Exactly. And it's very easy to say, all right, guys, it's been a fun game. We get why you did it. That, we understand why you believed and your lawyers believed this was okay.
It was legal.
Certainly, it was. The issue, the only real kind of smoking gun in the equation is that when you submit a deal for registration to the state as a car dealer in Georgia, you have to file an out-of-state delivery form if the car is not registered in Georgia and you're immediately remitting TABT. And so these guys sign that this car is being registered in Montana, and it is either currently being shipped out, and we've got a shipper here to pick it up, or the owner immediately intends to remove it from the state. And so that's where this idea of conspiracy to defraud the state has a little bit of legs, because they did, in most cases, lie about that. Exactly. And so, but again, either say that doesn't work anymore, and if we find cars and you don't prove that you've had it out of the state more than, certainly within the last 30 days, then we're going to give you a ticket and expect you to register your car here. That's a very justified thing. U-Haul registers all their cars in Arizona. Right. Most trucking companies register all their trucks in Indiana. And there's just different places.
And do we prosecute them? No.
Exactly. So this, it's very easy to get these salacious headlines about exotic car owners costing Atlanta taxpayers money.
And they are.
Sure. But
it's not,
it's not like Apple costing taxpayers money.
No, and I sat there last week when we were actually honestly coming back from Montana, which I haven't been there in 20 years, but we were coming back from Montana, and I was reading in the paper that it said that Ed Sheeran paid more in taxes than in the UK than Apple and Starbucks. And I was like, what a perfect picture of how, one, how broken it is, but two, how you just pick and choose. Like I said, they write the laws for who they want to write the laws for. In the business community, to get pinched like that, I understand that it's, on one hand, it's easy for me to sit here and for somebody to say, well, you're defending the 1%. Well, everybody's got a hobby that they spend a couple $100s a month on. And I realize that there's more zeros involved in this than not. But it's just as easy to say, hey, you get the cops to show up at my house, and because my wife owns cars and has never, even jaywalked, and you start executing search warrants and acting like a clown, I've got a problem.
Of course. Absolutely.
And so, well, it's really interesting. I'd love to keep up with it and have you back. One of the things that I'd really like to look at is with VinWiki. As it started, you said you have 500,000 YouTube subscribers a day, or subscribers to your channel,
and generally about 500,000 views a day as well.
How many episodes do you do a year?
I do one a weekday. So, and some days we'll do two or multiples or specials or something like that. So about, 320, 340.
Is it fair to say that you make more money as a YouTube star than you do as a VinWiki app owner?
Well, when you get into this kind of tech space, it's actually, in many cases, strategic not to make money, as preposterous as that sounds, because the way that companies are valued for funding rounds and, eventual acquisition is sometimes more favorable when it's based on the number of users and the engagement than it is as a multiple of revenue. So we very deliberately not put ads in the VinWiki platform because we don't want to kind of confuse that as we kind of try to grow.
You're selling it organically.
Exactly.
If you're selling it at all.
Right. And at this point, we kind of accidentally started making money because Google sends us a check on the 21st of every month. And it's awesome because, it keeps the servers spinning and the lights on in the warehouse, but it's been a very shocking change in my daily life. And I love it. It's great to be able to kind of immortalize these guys' stories because, these are probably the ones that their grandkids, don't care about cars. They don't get to tell anybody. And
and it's a very, in full disclosure, I am not, I spent years working in NASCAR. I know nothing. I'm in this office right now, if there's 20 people, I'm 18, 19, or 20 in what I know about cars. I broke my key fob last night and I don't know how to put it back together. So to say that, but as I watch your channel, it is always interesting. And to even sit there, and I'm sure that anybody who watched my episode on being a NASCAR team that was not worth a crap would look at that and say, that's interesting, because there's so many things that revolve around hobbies or love or passion that they get told, but your user base is so unique, it has got to be worth money. And your customer has got to be, you're either a child or a single guy who loves cars, or you're somebody who's just carrying 15-year car loans to buy whatever, as much as they can afford. I think it's interesting.
It is. And, certainly a lot of them have Montana tags and they've been calling, trying to figure out what they need to do this week to get into compliance. But the interesting thing is how miserable it's going to be our Atlanta area exotic car dealers. And I know that's like a bleeding heart argument, like who cares about these guys feeling, but they're real businesses that really support, that submit a ton of tax revenue
and a ton of jobs. The people that can work on those cars, it's not me and you.
No, it certainly is not. And I'll tell you what, you feel it from local law enforcement as an exotic car dealer. If your fire alarm goes off, 30 seconds later, fire truck's there. They know, we got to keep these guys, not on fire, and the cops are always helpful. It's been amazing. But in this case, whether or not they deserve to have extra buying power in the past through this tax avoidance strategy, the buyers at Lamborghini Atlanta, Motor Cars of Atlanta, Ferrari of Atlanta, Bentley Atlanta now have 7% less buying power than they did a week ago.
Yeah.
And they're coming into the fourth quarter in years where all the manufacturers are releasing more cars and they've got numbers to make and they're not going to. It's just not possible now.
Yeah.
And, it's just based on the way that this is being enforced. And the Caffeine and Exotic show, which comes up a few times a year, is Sunday. It's going to be a ghost town because everybody's scared to go drive their car. They don't know if they're going to get pulled over and arrested.
Well, if you ever get the chance, talk a little bit about Caffeine and Octane.
So on the first Sunday of every month, there's a show called Caffeine and Octane that has bounced around a few places. It was here off Windward for a little while, and right now it's at Perimeter Mall. So from about 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock a.m., you can come down there. They also have a great television show where they kind of document the show on NBC Sports that airs frequently. And then there's a kind of more exotic car focus. At Caffeine and Octane, you can see just every sort of kind of car. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of cars.
It's unbelievable. And again, as a guy who, likes cars, but doesn't, I will not own one, but
we might fix that at some point.
To take my, good luck to take my son out there. It's just awesome. If you ever are looking for something to spend time as a father-son kind of thing, there's nobody out there that isn't very interested.
Oh yeah. And it's stuff you never see because it just stays tucked away in a garage or something like that. And it's just so cool to see the cars out there and everybody having a great time.
Do you think we can get it back up here to that Windward office park?
The problem is with kind of a pop-up flash mob event kind of like that, you have to get the consent of every business owner that could be impacted. And that's one of the reasons why it happens really early on Sunday mornings.
Sure.
And so when, at Windward, we just outgrew it. It just got too big. And so unless we could find...
You see military vehicles. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Absolutely. And so I think it's been... Originally, it was at the Avenues in East Cobb. And then it went to the Northview High School parking lot for a very short time. Then it went to the Barnes & Noble parking lot off North Point Parkway. And one of my guys spun his Lamborghini around and ended up in a bush leaving there at one point.
That sounds cheap.
Yeah, it was not a good day for anybody.
Would you tell, so where do you, just to segue back to this Montana tax thing, do you think that it ends where the Department of Revenue is like, just don't do it again? Or do you think that they're just going to go full bore and just hammer these guys coming into the fourth quarter? Take your best guess.
I don't know. I was talking to the officer came by our studio and kind of told a story of how they learned about this and decided to try to, kind of enforce it. And that story's airing right now. And a lot of owners are confused, and he hasn't been extremely clear. Like, is there a grace period? Should they be worried to drive tonight? Is this something that, local law enforcement's really going to be on top of? My guess is that they probably won't do much about it to the people who don't voluntarily comply for the next 60 to 90 days, because it's just logistically hard to educate everyone who would need to be involved.
It's the government. It's not that fast.
So they're hoping that as people see, like the story tonight on Channel 2, that voluntary compliance will be happening. And it will, to some extent. Some people will realize, like, whether or not I feel like I can argue my way out of this, it's really not worth it. And in my opinion, that's probably what I would do. I've always just traded cars in and out. So you get a trade credit, you pay the incremental tax and whatever. But I did that because I had so many cars built up from the rental car company that I've still just benefited from those taxes that I paid 15 years ago. But when I look at what this is going to look like in enforcement, they're either going to have to not worry about it or be vicious about enforcement. And I have no idea what it's going to be.
Now, you said you had a exotic rental car company. I've got two questions. One, I would imagine that you don't leave that business or Lamborghini Atlanta without famous people in your cell phone.
Yes.
Who is the most famous person that is in your cell phone? We'll take two or three.
Okay.
Or we'll take one.
I don't know. We got a lot of hip hop artists and things like that. So like, Usher and Lil Wayne and Akon.
Maybe you can make this happen for me. I really would like to get Lil Wayne to do my theme music for the podcast moving forward. If you can make that happen, we'll.
What is the substance abuse policy in this studio?
Oh, you want to get him to come in? Just have him rap?
That would be an issue. Yeah. The customized freestyle Ben Burnett show intro.
This is not monitored by the FCC, so he can literally say anything he wants.
Oh, wow. He would.
We may not print that or play it, but then again, we may never have better ratings.
That's true.
And lastly, I want to know, the rental car company, has that ever had an outcome that went way far south on you?
Oh, absolutely. I think the best story from that was the week that I was getting married. back in 2009. I had a former Atlanta police officer actually that had rented our cars a few times come in, and he had a friend in town and they wanted to rent one of my Ferraris and one of my Lamborghinis. And so we put them in them and they just kind of paid for the first few days. And then they kept asking if they could extend the rental a couple of days. And so I had kind of set it up so I had kind of blocked off the week of my honeymoon that none of the cars were to be out. So around that Thursday, I was planning to get them all back in. But Wednesday night while I was at my bachelor party, I got a phone call from this woman that said, my husband is the guy that bought the Ferrari from your employee today, and he gave him our BMW and $15,000 as a down payment and was going to make payments for the rest. But we don't really want the car anymore, so we want to undo that deal. I said, wow, ma'am, every possible thing with what you just said is incorrect and wrong. And she's like, well, he's got our car and our money, and we've got your Ferrari. And I said, well, I'm going to need that back. And she's like, well, no. And claimed to be a lawyer, which absolutely wasn't true.
Yeah, didn't see that coming.
Exactly. So I go online, I check our tracking device, and the Ferrari one's not working. And there's a few reasons that can happen, satellite issues, battery issues, things like that. But the Lamborghini was, and so I tracked it down, and they had crashed it. And so they had knocked the front off of it, and it was at a body shop. I don't know if they thought somehow they were going to get it fixed in a few days, which certainly it took, the next 2 months to fix. But I got it repoed, took it back to the body shop that I use, and went out looking for the Ferrari. And I would get people calling me, say, hey, I just saw this Ferrari that's yours. I know you're looking for it. It's at the valet at Lenox or at this hotel or whatever. And so they were driving it around. But the problem is when you steal a car by renting it, it's not really grand theft auto. It's called theft by conversion. And so the cops, since it was stolen in DeKalb County where my warehouse was, and it was being seen in Fulton County, there's not like a BOLO or All Points Bulletin. Like, they don't talk about this for a long time. And if you know who stole it, they absolutely don't. So they were no help. The car, I mean, there'd be a cop standing next to it in a picture that somebody was sending, and I couldn't get that cop to say, don't give them the car back. So I had my other key. I'm going around chasing the car. And in the meantime, my fiance is freaking out. And, I'm like, look, I can't afford to file an insurance claim against this car because the way exotic car rental insurance policies work, you have them for government compliance. But if you ever file a claim, they'll non-renew you. They won't let you renew your policy.
Or all your other vehicles.
Exactly. So you get your money for the one that got stolen, maybe, but then you go out of business. Yeah. So it's awesome. And you had all these, $1 million in car loans that you got to keep paying on. So I was going back and forth. I finally got in touch with the guy who had rented the car, and he somehow had convinced himself that I'd be happy that he had sold this car off. And I'm like, you can't do that. And I was like, well, who is it? Who has the car? Because the woman wouldn't tell me anything identifying because she was worried about me sending the cops to her house, obviously. And he said, well, I don't have his phone number or his, address, but his name is Lucky. So I'm talking to
and
these
he
cops.
gave me $15,000 in cash.
And in fact, that's what I've been using to pay you for the rental extension. So I also don't have that anymore, and I'm not going to give you the BMW. I said, well, we're going to have to obviously involve the cops in this. And so he's really worried about that. Cops don't like having criminal charges against them after the fact, and they might get to go meet some people that they didn't change their place of residence. Yeah. So I get the cops involved. They're kind of going back and forth trying to figure out how to enforce it and what to do. And again, they're not much help. So I end up having to go through the wedding reception and then leave the next morning on my honeymoon with the car still missing. But when I got back, Lucky got in touch with me, and he said, do you want your Ferrari back? I said, of course I want my Ferrari back. I said, well, he's like, I need $5,000 for it. I'm like, you want me to pay you $5,000 for the return of the car that you know is stolen? He said, yeah. I said, do you understand that's extortion? He said, if that's what you say. And so I called the cops and I said, this is what he wants. He's like, well, ask him if he'll take a check. And I said, Mr. Law Enforcement Officer, if you bounce a check for $5,000, that's a felony. He said, don't worry about it. Understood. All right, great. So I called Lucky back and said, well, I don't have it in cash. The banks are closing. I'll bring you a check. He said, great. Lucky will happily take a check. So I called Bank of America, put a stop payment on it, and went down there. And of course, the car was just completely dead. They'd kind of deliberately gotten the battery dead and left it at a parking lot down near Georgia State. And I called a tow truck and got it. And so Lucky hung out. He actually brought a Maserati that he had that had the paint falling off of it, wanted some advice on how to care for his car. And so I was kind of nervous. We got it all back to my warehouse, but then obviously Lucky goes to deposit this check. And the bank calls me, says, "Hey, we just got this kind of weird looking guy with a weird looking check. I mean, he's got like face tattoos." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's an extortion payment for the return of stolen property. Please don't honor it. There should be a stop payment in your system." So great. So Lucky comes actually by. I didn't realize he had found out where we stored the cars somehow, probably because the guy had told him that when he sold it. But he came by, made all these threats, and I'm like, "Dude, you know what happened. Go away." And I never heard from him or the renter again.
Well, it sounds like sometimes I sympathize with you and sometimes I don't. Is probably pretty fair, but there's certainly I know tech people don't necessarily always shy away from the risk. I appreciate you coming in here to talk about what's going on with Montana and these the 1%'s car purchases that the 500 people are all mad about. But do that. Appreciate you coming in to tell stories. Ed, we'll catch up with you down the road. Thanks for listening to the Ben Burnett Show. Have a great week, everybody.
The light of my life, my footsteps move to the drum all night. That's why I gotta live. I gotta live life. Every day is breaking me down. I'm a hammer, I'm gonna break ground. So I know that the glory's coming any day, anyway. I'll make 'em say tonight I'm living my life. Gonna let go of what I like. There's a voice inside confining me.